Equity thrives on data because you actually have to look at the data and say, how are white women being paid relative to white men? How are Black women being paid relative to women? How are Latinas, how are Latinos being paid relative to white men? That's how we have a whole pay equity understanding that in general, women are making at best 79 cents on the dollar for every dollar made by a white man, and that number starts to drop precipitously as you layer on the identities on top of women.
Black women may not have, I was listening to your numbers, Aleese, we may not have the same access, that we might not have the same percentages on a number of levels, but we are the most educated the most educated people, demographic in the whole country, which I posit is why we are right at the crosshairs. Because I think it is our ability to transcend, that there is this big push to reshape DEI.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Black Women Talking Back Social Justice Podcast. This is episode 2, where we will be talking about DEI, what it means and doesn't mean for Black folks. I have some beautiful, brilliant Black women on the show today, and each one of them will share their experience and knowledge, expertise around DEI in the Black community, and especially as it relates to Black women and Black women in social justice. So our first guest is Chrystal Ellis. Chrystal Ellis Sweezy serves as the Director of Human Resources at the nationally recognized American Conservatory Theater and also resides as Board President of the California School Age Consortium. She has over 10 years in leadership and organizational development experience and is passionate about supporting nonprofit organizations. Our next guest is Lisalyn Jacobs. Lisalyn hails from the world, I want to say. But I believe Lisa, do you live in DC? I believe Lisalyn lives in DC, but she is definitely a citizen of the world. She advises clients, including federally funded nonprofits and federal government, on a variety issues, including racial and gender equity, campus sexual assault, workplace, and other economic protections for victims of domestic and sexual violence, and stalking, criminal justice, and policing reform, and frequently the intersections of two or more of these issues. So I want to say, for Lisalyn, I like to say that Lisalyn talks about national policy as it relates to all things gender justice, around gender and racial justice. I like to just sum it up, like everything, all things adjacent to national policy as it relates
I appreciate you, my sister.
racial and gender justice. And our next guest is, I have to say, my beloved sister, Tonya Lovelace, who brought me into this area of working very specifically with Black women and Black community around domestic and all things gender-based violence, who's just very dear to my heart. Tonya Lovelace is a global intersectional leader with over 40 years of experience as a community organizer and movement builder. For 30 years, she has provided training and technical assistance to organizations and systems at every level to end violence and promote equity. So these are our brilliant sisters that are with us today. We're going to talk about DEI, Chrystal Ellis, Lisalyn Jacobs, and Tonya Lovelace. We're going to begin this podcast with a simple question, and then we're going to move on into a wonderful conversation. So I want to start, first of all, with the simple question, which is, what the heck is DEI? What is the origin of DEI? What is it? How is it? Where did it come from? What's its origin?
Yeah, so this one actually, I was surprised that it had me kind of stumped, because I was like, do we go back to the civil rights? Do we go to ancient Egypt with like Mesopotamia and all the different people? Like, at what point? Because we've been dealing with the principles, we've been grappling with equity, diversity, and inclusion since like the beginning. So, at what point do we start this conversation? And then framing it from this side now, and with this administration today, I feel like it's hard to lock it in, but I'm going to go with the civil rights. Like I'm going to go with that time frame.
Chisel away at it, my sister. Chisel away at it.
Well, I'll just, add and say, Chrystal, we were right there because I was just thinking, I mean, from the same perspective, it's like, do we go back to antiquity? Like, how far back are we going? But then when I looked at everything, it made sense that DEI, at least in the US, would sort of start and be sort of rooted within the, where the laws begin to take shape for protections. And so I agree with you. It really starts in civil rights. And then Title VII established the EEOC,
Right.
which was another major factor. And then there was also affirmative action all happening right in there at the same time. But if I may, I'm going to kind of walk through some eras because I did do some research and looking at things, and some of the ways in which it has been, discussed in other places. They're saying that like that is in the 60s, but by the 70s, the scope has expanded beyond race. Even though civil rights invariably meant everyone, it essentially was focused, race was really like the foundation of that. But then, and really focused on racial underrepresentation. But in the 70s is where you get the feminist movement being much more involved. And this is where you start to have your early feminist programs coming out. And you start to have your and early diversity programs as well as the ERGs. Xerox was the first one to come up with an employee resource group. And then we start to focus more on assimilation in the 80s. During the Reagan era. And, the focus is really on making sure that people fold into programs and fold into their organizations. And so inclusion really meant blend in. And at the same time, you also had deregulation. So this is not the first time we had this happening, right? And so it's really happening in the 80s. And because of that, you're starting to get programs who are either streamlining or making broad sweeps across all communities, and in doing that, really moving beyond and really trying to move in a way that is going to reinforce infrastructure. But you do have that happening, and then in the 80s is where you get there's this book or this document that comes out, Workforce 2000, that really popularized this concept of workplace diversity. And that's where you start to have that coming in. And then you have really this reframing of DEI as being a business imperative, that it's really important for business to do this, and that it was important to have a process where you understood that it's more than just the recruitment, that it's actually supporting people in their positions. And then a few more places that I'll stop here on the road is you have 1990s that are really focused on sensitivity and making sure that people have some clarity around why there needs to be a care and some compassion across communities. The ADA is also coming into place in the 90s. And you also have other sort of, you have these sort of experimental tools that are beginning, or experiential tools that are beginning to happen, like Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, and from Jane Elliott, and this real focus on trying to get people to change their mindset 2000s gets into
Bias.
diversity.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, really getting into bias and talk about the concept of it's not inherent bias.
Implicit bias?
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. A couple of other stops I'll make is that they say that in 2000, the DEI training emphasized really globalization and this idea that it's beyond just the US. 2010s really gets into including key performance indicators and start to measure diversity. And then you also have Me Too, and you have marriage equality and LGBT marriage being approved. And then in 2020 and 2021, as we all know, everything shifted with George Floyd. And then you have Black Lives Matter and Stop AAPI Hate and other pieces coming together. But you also have programs beginning to have conversations about restorative justice and about anti-carceral approaches. And anti-Blackness begins to really take shape and more discussion around that. And then you start to have this backlash because it's in 2022. We don't have much time, right? We only have about 18 months to 2 years of people making these broad global commitments to diversity, to DEI. And then people begin to shift because in 2022 to 2024, you're starting to have real attacks on woke ideology. You start to have local and state legislatures and governments beginning to create policy and create law around this. You start to have attacks on schools. You start to have attacks on on children. You start to have attacks on LGBT youth and adults. You start to have this real, and on immigrant populations, an attack on intersectionality and critical race theory. And so our ideology gets focused on, and then here we are in 2025. And as we all know, with the anti-DEI measures that have now become federal policy, where they tested it out at the local and state level, and now it's at the federal level. And, what we have seen is that specifically for Black folks, that DEI almost becomes synonymous with Black. Like it's like Black people are DEI, right? And even more particular, which is just really never ceases to amaze me, how there is this debunking or this attack upon intersectionality. But I don't think I've ever seen a more intersectional attack, right? I mean, that the attacks that they're doing is at the intersections. They've gotten really good at understanding that you have to address gender woke ideology and DEI at the same time. And that sits squarely on the bodies of Black women, right? So like are the direct attacks at that moment. And there's a little bit of an axe to grind too, because when it comes to holding certain folks accountable, it's been Black women who've done that. So what we know is that this attack is not by accident, that there's really a full-blown process, but it's intersectional in approach, quite honestly. And so they've imbibed it, they've taken it in, they just have they found a way to use our own tools to attack us.
Yes, and we talked a little bit about that earlier, Tonya, how that, I may exaggerate to make a point, but it's my truth, that Black women bring their brilliance to the world, and we create all kinds of important philosophies and strategies that to better the world for everyone. And then everyone takes what we've brought for everyone and breaks it up into their little own personal pieces to protect or move their group to the forefront. Whether we're talking about women of color or we're talking about Black men, I don't care who we're talking about. Everything that we do becomes a commodity, so to speak, becomes a product that the rest of the world takes and breaks it up into pieces for their own as Lisalyn said earlier, self-interest.
Absolutely. And you guys, you gals, my sisters have, laid the groundwork for this so brilliantly. DEIA, we are now trying to, because folks who oppose these programs, the federal part of the civil rights movement, which are some of the rooms that I continue to sit in, they urge us to spell this out because, part of the goal of people who would oppress us is to, throw out these little acronyms and people don't know what they are. But when they hear these letters, they know they're not supposed to like them. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is what we're talking about. Sometimes we shorthand it as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have much of that courtesy of the 60s and the civil rights movement, starting with the signing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, right? Prior to that time, we literally had separate but equal, right? But the civil rights laws were designed to pull the curtain back from the ugly reality that separate was not equal, right? And then to spell out in these laws the ways in which diversity, equity, inclusion, access came along like a little later. Tonya was talking about that with the Americans with Disabilities Act, also with the Rehabilitation Act. But so diversity, equity, and inclusion in what, right? The Civil Rights Act spelled that out in a variety of places, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion in employment. That is Title VII. That was 1964. Equity in education, specifically for women. That is Title IX, which came along in 1972, right? Diversity in education, which sometimes got shorthanded early on as affirmative action, right? That first took root in the late 60s, really the early 70s, to see that institutions of higher education accepted women, right? My sister-in-law, my late sister-in-law, was among the first classes of women entering higher ed at Princeton in the early 70s, for instance. And so I'm going to try and be somewhat linear, right? Federal laws get passed, but then in addition to that, presidents often sign executive orders to help breathe life into these federal laws. So in addition to Title VII, which was about diversity, equity, and inclusion in employment, right? It was not enough to say there has been discrimination in employment. Now you have to hire people of color, you have to hire women. It is not enough to merely let people get in the door, right? President Johnson signed an Executive Order 11246, right, which urged employers to take affirmative action, right, in the employment context to make sure that women and people of color were included in the workplace, right? Not to have women and people of color hired and then the employment sector to continue business as usual, right? Because business as usual had heretofore been a place which was primarily white and male, right? And as a consequence, in the employment space, a space tends to perpetuate itself, right? If you have a space that is primarily white and male, and it's expanding, the people in it tend to look left and right and hire more people who look like them or who are their friends. So Executive Order 11246 was the federal government's way of exhorting particularly federal contractors, not only to hire people, different people, women, people of color, but to make sure that they were included in the workforce, right? To make sure that they got increasingly challenging assignments and that they could be eligible for promotion. They could be eligible to be promoted into the ranks of management, for instance. Equity in education was covered under Title VI, which is racial equity. Also under, as I said, under Title IX, which is about gender equity. Title VI also covers language access, right? To make sure that where there is federal funding, that people who do not speak English as their native language can have access to translation of documents, to translation of services, to facilitate their access to whatever it is that the federal government is providing, right? And so that was, I think, Sister Lovelace covered much of this brilliantly, right? Brought us to, and, you know, that was very much the lay of the land. I think that historically, education saw the first layer of attacks in the late 70s with respect to affirmative action and this idea. Really, imagine that affirmative action was about 10 years old in the late 70s at best when the first set of attacks arrived, right? The first slaves had arrived on the shore of the United States in 1619. The Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964, and so it was right about 1977 that the first challenges to affirmative action in education arrived, right? In the history of this country, that's about 5 minutes in the history of this country that women and people of color were, you know, afforded some. And I want people to not think about this as special attention, right? But as colleges and universities, again, when you invite people who have heretofore been excluded from an opportunity like education, you do need to take affirmative action. Because if you continue to do what you have been historically doing, even in the best sort of, you know, well-intentioned kind of way, you're not likely to include the people who just arrived. You know, I'm just dropping a footnote to say that in the mid-1990s, I worked in the United States Department of Justice in its main building. To this day, that building has more men's rooms than women's rooms. Because when that building was built in the 30s, women didn't work in it. So when we got to the 60s and Title VII and women came into the federal workforce, women's rooms were built as an afterthought, right? But an equity statute is designed to do things like that, right? To look at a federal building and to say, are there particular ways in which different groups of people are not being afforded the same kind of access, right? What do we have to do to the main justice building in order to ensure that people with disabilities can access it, right? Those were questions that people really began to explore in the 80s, and then with the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in the 90s, right? Because literally prior to that time, people trying to get into federal buildings, into courthouses who were in wheelchairs, sometimes had to literally be carried upstairs by other people because there was no other way to afford access. So equity really is looking at those questions, right? Looking in the context of education at issues like sexual harassment and sexual violence, right? Title IX is an equity statute that says that women should be able to access, women and girls should be able to access education on equal terms with men and boys, right? So if they are being sexually harassed or sexually assaulted, those are crimes that typically, that are disproportionately perpetuated by men, right? And so gender, except, one has to literally, again, and I'm going to end here, right? When you look at Title IX as an equity statute designed to ensure in education equal access for women and girls, that required in sports as well as in education, educational institutions looking at themselves, figuring out ways in which the programs they were providing, whether or not it was, not the same caliber of athletic equipment for athletic teams. Men's sports were getting afforded better facilities, better, a better gym, etc. But also to ensure that institutions of higher education were free of bias and harassment and sexual violence, because those kinds of things were holding women and girls back, right? Denying them equitable access to an education, which was what was being required by the Title IX statute.
Listening to you, Lisalyn, run all this down in a very linear way, just for me was just even made everything worse in my head, and because I thought to myself, I thought, oh my God, so we did all those things, and yet still here we are. Black women only are about 11-12% of graduates from college, while white women are 60s and 70% of the graduates from college. Black women still only own about 2% of the 5% of businesses that Black men own, that Black people own. And so even with all these things we've done, we are still at the bottom of the percentage of access and success in all those in all those areas: education, in economics, and owning businesses, in workforce and promotion and leadership. We're still at the bottom of the rung with all of these things in place for us. So my God, then if you remove those, I don't even want to go there. Well, not if, when you remove, as you remove those.
Right. So part of what Sister Lovelace was pointing to, I want to lift up, right? So we elected our first Black president in 2008, right? He served 2 terms, and really focused on inclusion in so many ways in his administration, right? People of color included in, political appointments at every level, the same for judicial nominations, etc. So equity is a tricky and a complicated thing, right? If you go back and look at what I was pointing to with the inception of the Civil Rights Act in the mid-1960s. And so here's the thing that I want to point out for folks before I make the point that I was about to. People act like the Civil Rights Act is ancient history and now we're equal and we're over it and we can do all the things, we don't need all these laws, etc. I'm looking directly into the camera. I am the exact same age as the Voting Rights Act, which was passed in August of 1965. I will be 60 in October of this year. Therefore, the Civil Rights Act turned 60 last year, right? That's how long we have had these laws to literally hold open these doors and, remove the barriers that were manifest and rampant in this country, right? Separate but equal, separate water fountains, separate swimming pools, inferior schools, inferior housing, which is not, I need to drop a footnote there. We had, I think as a historical matter, amazing Black teachers during the period of segregation, et cetera. That does not mean that they always had the money or materials that more resourced schools had. And as we know, with respect to Vice President Harris, our HBCUs are second to none. So I do not for a moment want to be heard to run down any of these things. But so we had 8 years of President Obama, which really stirred something up in a universe of people who did not ever envision a Black man and his family occupying the White House, right? And so we had the election of 2016, which could be, and I'm sure has been the subject of many other podcasts. So I'm not going to go down that road except to say that Hillary Clinton did not win. And that was Donald Trump's first term. And during that time period, we saw the murder of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement. And that really did bring with it folks, really sort of taking issue manifestly with what they saw as, injustice, inequity. Which really subsequently gave rise to a lot of commitments on the parts of lots of entities, right, to do better, to focus on issues around equity. But at that exact same time, during the first Trump administration, and I say this, Aleese quite correctly pointed out, I live in what we call the DMV, the District, Maryland, Virginia area, which means I always get a front row seat for what's going on in DC. During the first Trump administration, there were affirmative, problematic, negative efforts ongoing, right? Mm-hmm. During the Obama administration, President Obama was nominating women and people of color and white men to be U.S. attorneys, to be federal judges with lifetime tenure. When he was followed by President Trump, roughly 70% of the people that Donald Trump nominated to the federal bench in his first term were white men. Simultaneously, the Trump administration pressured a lot of diversity out of the senior ranks of the federal government. The federal government was literally being whitened. So as we turned to the elections in 2020, right, after also living with about a year of a pandemic, also ushered in by Donald Trump, whose first policy mandates were simply not Obama, right? The reason that this country was vulnerable to the COVID attacks was that the Obama administration had left Donald Trump a playbook for how you make sure pandemics do not reach the shores of this country, how you identify early the scourge of pandemics and make sure that they stay wherever they start. Well, as I said, Donald Trump's mandate number one was not Obama. So the first thing he did when he came in was to dismantle the early warning pandemic systems, which left this country vulnerable to COVID when it found its way to our shores. And so we were in the throes of COVID in the fall of 2020, but many of us gathered to try to help then candidates, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, get into the White House. And I sat with a brilliant universe of people putting together policies and proposals for what became ultimately the Biden-Harris administration. And I had my eye on what I just named, right? The leaching of diversity out of the federal government. So I helped put together the proposals that President Biden signed on the first day, which were focused on bringing greater racial and then later gender equity back to the federal government. Because, how can it be that we are a country that is 50% women, right? 25-ish, maybe 30% Latino, 12-ish, 15% Black, and not see that diversity reflected not only in our federal government, but at its highest levels. But again, particularly if you are trying to respond to the actions of a Donald Trump, that requires affirmative efforts, right? It requires being focused on who you hire. It requires being focused on actually initiating equity initiatives, which the Biden Harris did, masterfully, which again, history repeating itself, right? I think what I started to say before was this, right? Equity is a tricky business because it requires the fact, when you are pointing to the fact that someone has not received enough resources or is not adequately represented, say, in the upper echelons of the federal government, it also requires some adjustment in terms of people who have over-occupied those seats, right? The fact that white men tend to be overrepresented in some of these places and therefore history has misunderstood that as white men being smartest, right? As a historical matter, for a very long time, it was just them, right? That's why we needed a Title VII of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 to help us push past separate but equal. But when you have to explain to people, give me two more sentences, when you have to explain to people and or compensate for the fact that they really have enjoyed the lion's share of the resources or disproportionate resources, that adjustment makes people uncomfortable and resentful and makes them invent reasons which are different than the reality for why the resources need to be appropriately redistributed. I'm a preacher's kid, folks, and Aleese knows this, which is why she's kindly reminding me that I'm preaching. So I'm handing her the talking piece.
Thank you, Lisalyn. So while you were talking about equity being tricky as it relates to government positions or government structure, I couldn't help but thinking about how similar that is to the social justice field, to all of our organizations and subfields around social justice work are still being mostly dominated by men and white women. And so for Black women, I mean, we lack access and equity, not only in the U.S. as a citizen, but in this very work that we've committed ourselves to, social justice work. We are marginalized as citizens, but we're also marginalized as activists and advocates doing the work of trying to create social justice. And so now this is going to have to start becoming a drinking podcast.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah. But thank you, Lisalyn, for, first of all, I know you said you didn't want to be linear, but you were linear. And that really, for me, that worked for my brain. I could just really see how the dots connect in so many ways, along with the nuances as well, the concrete and the nuances that Tonya mentioned earlier. It all made me a little bit more upset, but thank you. It's so clear to me now just how I didn't even know what the word is, but just how blatant, to Tonya's point, how blatant the use of the structure of DEI is being turned on its head to be used to dismantle DEI. It just became so clear. So thank you. I hope our listeners, when you listen to this podcast, I hope you hear that. And if you don't, I want you to pause and rewind and go back again, because it is being painted so very clearly here in both the information that Tonya and Lisa have shared around government and the initial origin of DEI work.
You know, and if I may, for just one more second, I would be
Because the
remiss.
preacher's not done.
I would be remiss if, as I was pointing to, you know, how acronyms get weaponized. The other acronym that got weaponized early on was critical race theory.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, you know, the brilliant brainchild of Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. Right. And was created, at least in part, to talk about what I'm going to shorthand describe as the compounding effects of discrimination. That's one way that you can describe it, right? All of us who are on this call are women of color and have likely experienced.
Not me. I'm blackity black, not a person of color.
Okay. All right. We Black folks, if that's how you want it. I'm not trying to presume anybody else's identity is all I'm trying to say about all of that. But just merely to say that we have experienced discrimination, but both because we are women and because we are whatever other identity we bring beyond being women, whether it's blackity black or Afro-Latino, which is a little bit more my part of the universe, whether or not you're LGBTQ, each layer, compounded layer of identity, and each, you know, way in which you differ from the folks who are the majority in this country brings with it an additional layer of bias. And I will leave it just to say that when I was doing that work for the Biden-Harris campaign at that moment and trying to understand what had happened with the whitening of the federal workforce, I looked at the data in some of the agencies and I saw that even in places where blackity black people and people of color were represented, that sometimes people were getting disparate pay even though they had the same job. That people of color who were, say, a GS 14 step 5 or something, or should be because of the position they held, were not being compensated in the same way or to the same extent that their white colleagues were. So that's why we need equity, right? Equity thrives on data, right? Because you actually have to look at the data and say, how are white women being paid relative to white men? How are Black women being paid relative to women? How are Latinas, how are Latinos being paid relative to white men? That's how we have a whole pay equity understanding that in general, women are making at best 79 cents on the dollar for every dollar made by a white man, and that number starts to drop precipitously as you layer on the identities on top of women, right? White women are making closer to that number. Black women are making significantly less than that 79 cents on the dollar number.
Yes, Black
Sermon over. Sermon over.
We're making 66 cents, yeah.
66 cents.
And that's why we are still the most educated group in the country. Black women may not have, I was listening to your numbers, Aleese, we may not have the same access, that we might not have the same percentages on a number of levels, but we are the most educated the most educated people, demographic in the whole country, which I posit is why we are right at the crosshairs. Because I think it is our ability to transcend, that there is this big push to reshape DEI, and I say reshape it because I don't think they're getting rid of it. They're just reshaping it for their own needs. Like they're trying to get money back in the hands of white people. They are trying to say that white people are discriminated against.
That's right.
They are trying to reshape everything, and the programs that they are freezing and the money that they're holding I believe, and I have heard in some programs already, that it's just being reshaped to fund the people they want to fund.
Right.
Somebody was telling us that specifically in New York. So in a program that's happening there. So just want to say that that I think it is the way that we survive regardless, that we are under attack. Yeah.
I think I told you, Tonya, but I most recently, maybe over the last month or so, Spirit has just been constantly revealing to me that
Don't tell you, don't tell your stuff. Don't tell your stuff till you put it together. We're not doing that right here.
No, I wasn't going to talk. I wasn't going to go to part B. Just
okay.
Part A.
All right.
Yeah, part A.
I know this is the podcast, but I am saying, hey, don't. Yeah, we're not doing that.
You must have said no. I wasn't going to go there.
Okay, sorry. I had to
but just to back up your point around the shift, Spirit has been just telling me over and over again that things are not going away. Things are being shifted. They're being expanded and changed. So that when we talk about culture, we're just not talking about people of color, or we're just not talking about people who are marginalized because of disability or access, but culture, white folk have culture too. And so all these specializations, so to speak, have to now include those areas, those people, white people, and the areas in which they experience whatever oppression. Because let's tell the truth, let me just be my spiritual self for a second here. White folk been just as oppressed as everybody else. As the oppressor, they've been oppressed because their own stuff is so evil, that evilness within them, that lack of love and compassion, which is the antithesis of being a human being. So for me, that's oppression. And then, of course, the fact that America is not a country by and for the people, but it's a country for the testing of capitalism. And those white folk who have not had the advantage of growing in a capitalistic way, have not been born into it, or have not been able to develop it themselves. So they're poor and they're undereducated and all the things, oppression. Those white folk have been oppressed too. And so I'm saying all, and even though, some people are starting to wake up to that oh, wait a minute, maybe this is not about race. Maybe this really is about economics. The point I was just trying to make is that, we did, I want to be careful. I'm recording. In the DEI work, whether we're talking about anti-racism awareness and training, or we're talking about DEI implementation and design, poor white folk didn't see themselves as being cared for in that work, as being seen or cared for in that work. And so since I think probably like 2002, I started saying, oh, it's going to be a revolution, but it's going to be white people. It's going to be the white people's revolution. All these white people who have been left out in their mind are going to rise up. Now, of course, the powers that be gave them something to rise up against, which is, oh, it's been bad for you because of people of color and immigrants. So, they got the teeth in the wrong behind, as my professor used to say. I'm trying to raise the point that, even in all this incredible, wonderful work that we've done, not we, but Lisalyn and others have done around the policy work, human beings were left out. And I don't think that was intentional, but it is the reality. It is the reality. And so as I think about, when I think about the wiping away of DEI or the restructuring, because I think that's going to happen, is going to restructure so that white folk can be included. I think that's a correct beginning, a new beginning. I think the problem is there's nobody to balance it. There's no one who can balance how we do that and include everybody, because it's so easy, as Lisalyn identified, to go right back to that slippery slope where the white people are still hiring the white people who know the white people, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we can just end up right back where we began. But I think that in going forward, we do have to look at some type of policy that works for everybody. Now, I'm saying that to say one more thing, and then I'm gonna shut up, because it's a show where I'm supposed to listen. Again, somewhere along the way, some Black women are gonna figure out how to do this the best way. And some other folk are gonna take it and make it work and take credit for it and get the money for it and all that, because that's how it goes.
Yep, then it gets monetized.
Yep, that's how it goes. But it is going to happen. I'm sorry, Chrystal, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think
Lisalyn just got me so riled up. Sorry.
You want to keep going, Aleese?
No, go ahead, Chrystal.
I'm just sucking it up today. It's soaking it up. I mean, some of what I hear from you, Aleese, is like the racial reckoning and the EDI reckoning, the level setting and the reconfiguring and the reframing. And I feel like we've been doing that throughout history. That's been painted over and over and over, different ways of how when we talk about reckoning something, we're setting something straight, or we're justifying something. We do that every time we set up a new law, a new movement. When all those people went out, and it's like millions of people, marched in 2020 with the George Floyd, right, murder. So we saw something happening. We're seeing movements. We've been living through this. One thing that I think is really important through all of it, though, is it starts at home, and it starts with your faith, whatever that, your faith, and it starts with your neighbor. And I know that sounds like pretty basic, because we're talking about breaking down structures and systems and oppression and all of these things, and then creating new laws and doing new forms of reckoning. But I really think when I think about what I can do in the workplace, or what I can do in this neighborhood, or how I show up, first and foremost is my relationship with God and how I understand myself through that lens, which is I am enough. I am wonderfully, fearfully made. I am powerful. I don't need any law or legislation or president to validate my intelligence, my worth, or my value. And I try to impart that to people that I come in contact with, whether they're white, Black, Asian, whatever it is. Because I think if we get racism is real, we deal with it daily. But I don't know that the change happens always at that level. You said, it might not be race, it might be economics. I think it's a matter of the heart. It's an issue of heart, which is why I love the arts, because it could shift the way you think, because it touches you, it speaks to you. So I just think it's an aspect to consider as leaders, but as people. Doesn't matter what your position is, doesn't matter what your educational background is. You do have the power and the authority and the value and the purpose to actually affect change right in your home. And when it happens in your home, it happens in the community. And when it happens in the community, it can happen on a global level. So I think that's where, because all these things are going to keep going, but if we don't have the heart and the foundation, I don't know how far we'll go. And I would be interested to see, there's this idea, like, it's not even an idea. It's a notion that, yes, Black people and immigrants and veterans and the members of the queer community are oppressed, systematically oppressed, strategically attacked. Yes, that is true. And I hearken to MLK when he was like, go build your own community, like go build your own stores, go create your own businesses, develop your own economics, like economy. I'm not saying that we don't do that, because we have seen a lot of success and growth in the community, and currently we've seen that. And one of the biggest ways we've seen this is like, and we know it's not fair, but we've seen it in access to entertainment. We see more representation of African American folks there. Asian, we see a little bit more representation of Asians. And so there's some, that's a weak kind of example, but it is a good, it does show you that there is more room and representation of Black people having success today than maybe they had in the 50s. That's my point, right? We had 1% of Black people have filled executive positions in Fortune 500 companies. 1%, but that is 1%. Well, of course we want more. So I mean, just, I listened to Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's like, there's no other time in the history of the United States of America that I would want to live besides right now. And I kind of feel the same way. It's like, the opportunity is ripe for us to get grounded in where we're at, what we believe, what we think. Start with your home, then get into the community, and do what hold people accountable with your money. Where are you spending it? I don't have to announce it. I don't need to protest. I just know where I'm not spending my money these days, and I know where I am spending it. And Lisalyn, I took a tip from you in preaching, so I'm going to put down step away from the pulpit for a sec.
Ordain you all.
You're doing great.
Yeah. I agree a lot with you, Chrystal, because I don't believe anything is either or black and white. And so, and we're human beings, and so we're complex beings, and the world that we created is very complex, meaning the systems of this world are very complex. And so I don't think that there's one particular way for the way forward. I don't think there's one particular way forward. I think there are a lot of things that need to be taking place all at the same time. So I am at the core, I believe that all hope for us to be the best human beings that we can be is about individual transformation. And that transformation, because for me, that transformation is about love. And if I can learn to love me, if I can do that, I can have compassion for others. Once you love yourself, you can't help but once you can love yourself with all your stuff, it's easy to have compassion for other people. And so when we have love and compassion working on a grand scale, that will transform, all of our humanity. And so the way in which we interact and engage and treat each other, I believe that is the big picture in terms of how we save this place. So I am about trying to be the best human being, trying to fall more and more in love with my crazy self every day, trying to love other crazy people more and more every day. At the same time, though, I feel like, and I want to put a pin there, and if I forget, you guys may have to remind me to come back to that. I have to remind myself every day that I live in a capitalistic bubble. America is about economics. It's an experiment on economics. And it's the only purpose of the United States of America is to see, can every individual be rich and successful? And we're still playing that out. And so I have to remind myself that every day that first and foremost, I live in an economic world, most of all, a capitalistic world. So everything is motivated by and towards the result of more money, more money, more money, more money. So I have to remind myself of that every day, because as a citizen of America, I am a consumer.
Mhm.
And so I participate when I don't want to participate, because I have to participate in order to live here. So I'm always trying to monitor myself on how I participate in this machine or this this bubble that I know is very problematic. I know I participate in what makes it problematic. And so I'm trying to remember that every day, so that I don't get too high on my horse. That's number one, keeps me humble. And then I can go to the next piece, is that because we live in a capitalistic world, people need protection. The people who are not rising up with the billionaires and billionaires, we need protections. And so I have to, I'm just talking about me right now. I have to contribute to the work that creates protection from those who cannot protect themselves or who need help protecting themselves, because the capitalistic machine will destroy them. And so I have to contribute. As I'm contributing to this capitalistic machine over here, even though I don't want to, I have to be intentional about deconstructing, or if I can't deconstruct it, at least mitigating the impact that it has on my fellow human beings. I have to be about that. And so I can't just rest my laurels on, I'm going to be this wonderful human being and I'm going to love people, and then somebody else is going to love people and the whole world's going to get better, even though I believe that's the answer. I believe while that is the answer, I have to also be about monitoring myself, how I perpetuate this thing that's killing most of us, and how I can mitigate the impact that has on my fellow human beings. And for me, that begins with Black women. I'm concerned about everybody. I want it for everybody. But since I'm only one person and I can only do one thing, and my professor told me in graduate school, he said, Aleese, find your little corner and let your light shine. So my little light is trying to shine on how I can help protect, help grow the lives of Black women. That's my little thing. That's what I do. That's what I do well. And so all of those things are happening at the same time. So I'm just saying, yes, I'm with you on, let's be our best human being. Let's be the best human beings we can be. And that brings about change. But while we're doing that, we also want to minimize how we perpetuate the thing. We don't become the thing we hate, or how we participate in the thing that we hate, monitoring that, and then also then mitigating the impact. And if we can, not only mitigate, but prevent.
Yeah. I mean, like, being in mostly predominantly white spaces most of the time, so I agree with you, Aleese, like, and I'm taking notes too. So there's some things I want to reflect on. Just from my experience of like being in predominantly white spaces all of the time, much of the time, and being in a leadership role or leadership roles, it is the cloud of witnesses that I call on, right? From history, but also from my grandmother, and also from my sisters and my close friends who speak into my life and share with me some of the vulnerabilities that they face that they may not share with other people, but they say, yeah, you scraped your knee, but go and get up. And it is those people that then give me the strength and the feel empowered and confident and comfortable to get up in a room of predominantly white people, or to be in those spaces and to share that I think this system needs to change, or this policy needs to change, or we need to consider how we're recruiting, or look at bias, or whatever it is. So that's why I say, like, I think it starts it starts with the person, starts with your heart, it starts with your community, and then you are then empowered to get out there. Some people don't have that, and they just are running. They don't need that either. They're able to go and be movers and shakers without that. But yeah, I certainly I don't think we should sit back on our laurels of being good people. Like, the intention is not to be good people. It is to have an impact, and it is to do good work. And it's not really about being a good person as much as it is being clear about who you are, where you come from, what your source is, and what you want to do.
Absolutely, absolutely, Chrystal. I mean, over the years, and I'm sure Tonya and Lisalyn have had this experience where I've run into activists and advocates who call themselves working for justice,
Mm.
but at the same time perpetrating all types of violence and abuse and discrimination against their colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
So not practicing. So you're right, starting with yourself and your own little circle of whatever that is. If you can't be the best human being there, you're certainly not going to be able to be the best human being out in the world. And anything you might pretend that you're doing out in the world is for naught.
Right.
If it's not real, we can say at home, so to speak.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we can be, it's important for us to be clear that, we can cause harm to each other. And while there's a lot of, discussion about, what's happening to us, right now, there is also just this understanding that, at times we can be some of our worst enemies within our own context. And so, and I do think that, as you're saying, Aleese, with this being a capitalist society, it really got built on our backs, right? With us building this economy, right? Like, we built this economy, so it's here, we built it.
Yes.
But at the same time,
we are the gold.
We are the gold, like, within that context, right? But also, I do like this idea, Chrystal, of like how important it is to start with you, because in this time with these executive orders coming down, and the first round I felt in 2016 and throughout there, I was in a different position. I was running the Women of Color Network. We had already created this whole context of jagged justice. We had a ready platform when things began to happen. When he got elected, when the election happened, our phones were off the hook. And then we had a call the next day. We were poised for it. We were ready for it, and we were able to support communities, individuals across the country who were calling in because they were concerned about the immigrant populations and tribal populations and LGBT populations then. But this round, as much as, I was talking with someone who was saying that, so many of us have walked around or were walking around in the beginning of this new administration, sort of like with our steel up, and with this assumption that we could get through this unscathed. Like, we know what's coming. We've seen this before. But again, the kind of executive orders that we're managing, the kind of issues that it's causing, is being done with such precision that I have to say, like, when I felt it coming for my own stuff, right? Having lost 3 contracts in this, like, when those things began to happen was when I started to really understand that I was going to have to start with me, because the attack was on me, right? Like it was just so personal. I've been doing DEI. I was a DEI student, right? Like, I came into college with that context. They recruited urban-based students and dropped us into the cornfields of the campus that we were on. And then they had in process, programs that had been in existence for years and were ready for me when I got there. And then we were expected to be in leadership and to demonstrate our leadership when we got there. And so, I've been doing this work for a very long time. And, it is, I feel like it's like in my DNA. It is my actual calling to do this work at these intersections. But at the same time, when all of these things began to happen, I realized that I was experiencing. I'm not going to say I realized. It took me some time to realize that I was embodying that the changes and the over and over executive orders were actually. I was feeling it in my body, and I was having somatic responses, and I was having emotional, spiritual responses to what was happening. So the only way really to like bring myself to a place where I can be good and be on this webinar was that it had to start with me. And I had to acknowledge my resentment about it. And I had to acknowledge that I felt like I was having to change all over, that I was having to start all over again. Um, and and not because, that I was having to start all over again. And that it was being forcefully taken from me, just these things that I was experiencing. And and so I've just been doing a lot of work on it. And I've come back to, it takes breath work, it takes body work, and it takes a laying on of hands and being connected with people in order for me to survive this. So it really will have to start with love. And I had to start, believe it or not, I mean, some people are like, well, of course you do that, but like praying for this administration, like praying for these folks that are doing this, because it's really a matter of me having to acknowledge that, regardless of how I feel about it, there's still humanity. These are still human beings that have these beliefs and this approach. And looking at my own involvement in the early years of DEI and how I really was not trauma informed then, right? Like, so then I had to realize that I really did. I can see where you had people leaving those events and going our events, going back home in the 90s, in tears, and me not really having the kind of, I actually didn't really, at that point, I felt that the end was more important than what was happening in front of me, and not really having the ability, and not so much that I wasn't trauma informed, but I was not bringing my trauma informed perspective to that room.
Mm-hmm.
Over time I did, but by then, there had been waves of people who had already gone home with these feelings and have come back now and are attacking. So there's just been, it's been a time of reflection and to think about how to do this work better, and recognize that these are people that are still doing these things, as much as it's hard for me to believe that sometimes. And also to start with my own heart and my own healing. So I do think that those things, and to reshape what I'm doing, and to come back in a way that is that I think is fueled with lessons learned.
I think that so we got as far as 2020, and then we sort of leapt to 2025, other than I think that the Biden administration, in picking up and queuing into these issues of equity, did an amazing job. Many of us, Tonya and I both have the privilege to know lots of people who have gone into and out of government, depending on the administration and at senior levels. I think that in reflecting, one of the reflections has been that the Biden administration did not do the best job of tooting its own horn. And I say that in reaction to something that you were pointing to, Aleese, which is, lower income white people not feeling seen or addressed or cared for in the context of equity work. Now, it is simultaneously well to say that lower income white folks are everywhere. But, one of the things that folks don't always see if an administration doesn't toot its own horn well is how much time equity spends contemplating the needs of rural people, right? And I'm not at all, sort of suggesting that that's where all the white people are, or that's the only thing that we should be focused on. But I think that many of us, with the onslaught of this administration, have really marveled at their willingness to hurt their own folks, right? This came up also in the book, The Sum of Us, and I'm going to be able to name the author of that in a minute. But of course, I wasn't planning to talk about her at that moment, so it's not in the front of my head. But she talks about how, like white people are the biggest beneficiaries of Medicaid, for instance. So when red states refuse to take the Medicaid expansion, the same people who are all on the MAGA train are being hurt because they can't get access to the kind of health care that they need. But so many of us have really marveled in this administration by the determination. Thank you so much, Tanya. It's Heather McGee and The Sum of Us. We've really marveled about the ability or willingness or indifference of this administration in terms of the way that they're hurting their own people. I think that we have name checked it. If not, I will do so now directly. The biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action and equity programs are white women. Right? So between that fact and the fact that equity programs really do take on board the needs of rural folks and that those people are also disproportionately white, right? One thing I have to say about this crowd, the crowd that is currently in power, the crowd that, quietly started drafting state legislation decades ago, is they make very good, if pernicious, use of their time in the off years, which is why they learned from the things that they thought they did and did not do well between 2017 and early 2021. And so came back with a playbook, which is entitled Project 2025, right? And has really been telegraphing so many of the plays between, coming in, and the first thing that they did was to sideline the executive order that I pointed to that was about racial equity and to, call it left wing, wasteful equity and just all of these kinds of things. I think that when we began the show, someone was sort of pointing to how it can sometimes be difficult to define what at least their acronym DEI is, right? They do that somewhat intentionally to keep it vague, so that whatever is the flavor of the week that they are attacking can be sort of lumped in a very indiscriminate way under the mantra of DEI, I would argue. Clearly, that's not the only universe that they're attacking, right? They are at the same time attacking immigrant folks, the LGBTQ community, particularly the trans folks, in the way that they are being singled out and demonized, and also the subject of executive orders. And I will drop a footnote here to point out something that somebody brilliantly said earlier today, which is true, right? they see all these executive orders coming out of the White House as if, some kind of Xerox machine is on high or whatever. Executive orders really are created by the executive branch, i.e. the president. They're intended to address things that go on in the executive universe, right? By which I mean the federal government. So despite the fact that Donald Trump signs executive orders, pointing fingers at law firms that he does not like, they have zero legal impact. And that is because law firms are not creatures of the executive branch. Now, they have their impact when law firms are afraid and they're concerned that their clients might, not think as well of them or direct as much business to them if, for instance, the administration decides to withdraw some security clearances. But as an objective matter, Donald Trump cannot command a law firm to do anything. And we have seen that in that several law firms, rather than start writing large checks to this administration, have chosen to go into court and to get courts to basically declare more elegantly what I just said, right? You, Donald Trump, have no power over these law firms, and we therefore will enjoin all of these, bankrupt executive orders you put out there targeting law firms to scare them. So I will again get off my, preaching stump, but just to I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about the particular ways in which this administration is weaponizing things like executive orders and is also wholesale firing people without cause, right? And singularly, I have never seen a bunch of folks who were less informed about how the federal government works than the people who are running around basically with machetes, lopping off wholesale different parts of federal agencies while having absolutely no idea what they do, or pointing at, websites of Arlington National Cemetery or the National Park Service and going DEI, therefore we can't talk about Harriet Tubman, until somebody goes, are we really going to have this conversation this way? Again, wholly uninformed, wide swaths of wholly uninformed behavior that folks are being subjected to.
Well, and one thing I just want to say, and I know, Aleese, you're going to probably reshape the discussion or start to move us in a direction, but in as much as I'm talking about, how I think DEI practitioners, right, are like really re-examining, looking back at their work, looking back at the work of the field. I also don't want to get, and I'm talking about my own responses and some of the things I'm doing to, sort of weave love more into my work and that sort of thing. At the same time, well before DEI took shape, well before we were in programs, white fragility has been around for a long time. Like, white privilege is the basis of like all of this that's happening at this point. And so, and we have lost many people to fragile, egos and reactions to those of us who in any way should become so uppity as to become successful in any way, to come through a DEI program and do well, such that they want to start destroying these programs that were put into place so that we can come back from, the many yards behind that we are to bring ourselves up to a certain point. And so I by no means am thinking that and trying to say, because, many things can be true at the same time. It can be true that I need to think and we need to think and people are thinking about how to redo their work and the best ways to come into this in a restorative way and in a way that's healthy and that's based in love and at this, and beloved community. But at the same time, this is being done with such precision, and this is not the first round of this. We have had many, many forms of backlash for centuries and centuries and centuries. And so, this is not just a response because I made somebody cry in a train. Like, this is people being able to dismantle whole programs, whole departments that were creating, in some ways, that were making justice accessible to various folks. And as we start to get to discussion of anti-carceral approaches and so forth, people very much wanted to just squash those discussions immediately when they started to happen in 2020. And so the backlash had to be as big as possible. And so the tsunami of this now, right, is only matching the kind of progress we were making. So I think that the reaction is as big as our progress. And so it's a matter of now, as you're saying, Chrystal, reshaping is taking in what it is and moving forward. And as Lisalyn has made real clear, knowing our history and being able to stand on that, knowing what the terrain has been, and seeing what's happening right now as it is for what it is, and at the same time, not losing our humanity in the process.
Not only losing our humanity, but the thing that has really worried me is that those of us who are already involved in social justice might see all the things that's coming down the pike as, oh shit, we gotta double down. We gotta stop this, heal this, support this. We gotta double down. We have to do even more work now. And we are already, I think, as we said, starting off this podcast, we are already shouldering the majority of social justice work. Our sisters are already getting aneurysm, stroke, heart attack, cancer, doing this work, killing themselves doing this work, sacrificing their health, sacrificing their time with their family, sacrificing their retirement and benefits, sacrificing their lives, everything that makes up their lives, slicing off a piece of their life to do this work. And my fear is more than I'm not scared of anything Trump and his people might do, and none of that shit scares me. What I'm afraid of is that my sisters are going to kill themselves faster and more trying to stop it. So my question is, how do we do our work better than we've ever done it before, with less stress and less sacrifice? I would even say zero sacrifice, but that might be, too big of a jump. So let's start with less sacrifice than we have it. What we can't do is go home. I got sisters calling me every day, angry and full of anxiety from the news and all the stuff. And I'm like, and that's not even about the work that they're doing every day. That's not about the work that they're doing. That's not about their job. That's the context they live in, and then try to go do their work. And so my fear, and the second reason for this podcast, is how can we help our sisters back it up and say we are not going to kill ourselves because of what's going down. We're going to find a better way to do our social justice work, that doesn't require us to sacrifice pieces of our lives, starting with our health.
I think the first
That
thing
we will still feel like at the end of the day, we've done a good job. Because we have to feel like we've done a good job.
Right.
That's some other work we have to work on. But so
I think the first thing we have to do is accept and remind each other that we are not responsible for this, right? And I'm not finger wagging or judging the choices that other people made. Sometimes I do. But, the work that my brethren who do polling, one of the things they explain to me and others is that in order to increase the size of the movement, so that and I don't even necessarily mean progressive movements, I just mean an anti-Trump movement, right? The tent has to be big enough to invite the people who did not, from my perspective, vote correctly in November to come in and be part of the resistance, right? So I may be angry some days and feeling like, well, you brought this on, you're getting what you deserve. But mostly I'm sort of like, okay, took you a while to realize it. You are here now, if only because you are being adversely impacted in some way, but let's figure out how we can go forward together. But I think that when folks who have been on the front lines forever, who were out there last summer and in November and running up to November, trying to explain to people what was going to happen, but we were not heeded, right? We need to therefore give ourselves permission to not be in all the places, right? Let other people come to the front and do the marching. And, engage in some of the planning and getting together groups and figuring out the responses and whatever. Because we have done it forever and a day, and there will still be responses and protests and a whole variety of other things on any day of the week, regardless of whether or not we are the ones to do that convening. I love these, videos that I see that, all the Black people are doing whatever the country dance is, where them fans at, the world is on fire, and the Black people are, we do need to figure out ways to gather in community, to continue to laugh, to support each other, to line dance if that's working for you, to torment your kids with old school music like I do. Mine has been complaining about Tony Braxton today. I'm very lucky. We need to not forget these families who we have been neglecting for all the work. I am very lucky that I have the time to be out here on the road looking at colleges with my son. And the fact that having him grounds me and makes sure that I focus on other things and make sure that I am cognizant of the reality beyond the crazy in which we happen to reside. Because the reality is, again, as I said, I'm 65. I'm also a youngest child. My father was at the March on Washington.
You're not 65.
Oh, that's right. I was born in 1965. I'll be 60 in a few months. Thank you,
Oh, let
my
me
sister.
fix that. I'm gonna fix that.
Right. But,
not
the
yet.
only other point,
Not
my
yet.
father,
We on our way.
When did Lisalyn get to be that age?
my father rode buses in the 40s in Southern Virginia in segregation, right? And we're immigrants. I'm first generation American. Nevertheless, my family has seen some things and lived through some things, but we continue to thrive nevertheless. So we gonna be here. We gonna make sure that people have, that community has. We're gonna hunker down against the storm, and we gonna be here. Those folks blew into town, and we were here. They gonna blow out of town, and we gonna be here.
But Lisalyn, some of us are not gonna be here. We're going to
Well,
lose.
that was the reality regardless. But your point about it raises a question, I think, about the reasons that some of us are not going to be here. And so I think we need to be asking questions about where the interveners are. How are we trying to intervene with the folks who we are worried about, right? Who need that kind of support and care and permission, because sometimes we need that, right? Permission that you don't have to be, or reminding again that you don't have to be making that plan or on the front lines or doing a whole variety of things that, will continue to get addressed whether or not you address them.
I will say, I'm in my small world, I'm not so much worried about Black women trying to fight against the machine and do their normal social justice work. I'm worried about them doubling down on the social justice work that they do. I'm worried about the ones who are doing community work, who's working with children, who are working with reentry, who are working with domestic violence and sexual assault, who are already thinking about how they double down and how they can make up for whatever they've lost, those who have lost funding. How many more hours can they work? What can they give out of their own pockets so to make sure that survivors have food to eat? I'm worried about that doubling down. I think in my small world, I think Black women are saying, just what you said. I don't have to put on my energy over there. Y'all go ahead. Y'all do that. Y'all do that. I'm worried about them doubling down in the work that they do in their communities. And and that's where the sacrifices are made. And I'm trying to figure out, I'm hoping that collectively we can figure out how we rescue, so to speak, our sisters from that, feeling that they have to make up for whatever's been taken away, whatever's being lost, that they have to fill that deficit. Because that's what has been the norm. That is what we do. We fill the gap, whatever it is. If it's more money that's needed, more food that's needed, more presence that's needed, whatever, more energy, more prayer, more tithes, more whatever it is, we fill up that gap. And I'm just figuring, how can I encourage my sisters not to fill the gap?
Well, I think this podcast is one way of encouraging the start of that conversation. I'm sure that you are in places where you are doing, making space to have that dialogue, which is, I think, important. Tonya points to restorative justice, right? Other kinds of processes where we can sit together, right? And we have a format or an approach or a way to to figure out how to go forward. I was thinking today, I was talking to somebody about something else, but about the concept of being survivor centered, right? I think you basically have to give people to understand that if we are going to survive this process, that we must center our own needs, right? And that's not selfish, that's preservation, right? Because we're usually moving so fast and have our hands in so many things that we are not trying to have that, we're not being interrogating in that way. And just to point out that equity is a process that is both internal and external.
Yes.
Equity is certainly what are you doing in the workplace and how are you accommodating or making sure that people are included, but it's also looking at yourself as an actor, right? Or a participant, etc. And we have to figure out how not to be participants in our own demise. To be blunt, to your point, Aleese, We have to figure out how to be the best stewards of ourselves, our time, our resources, and everything else that we have ever been, than we have ever been. And how to engage other folks who we fear for at this moment in a similar dialogue.
Well, I think a part of this is just, in thinking about the various ways we've been talking about this is, the bottom line is what's happening is not because of what we've done wrong, but because of what we've done right. I mean, that's what this is about, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that if we remember that
Like
part,
that.
and then we keep like supporting each other in that way, do the dancing and the singing and the listening to, good old school music, and having your family. And I'm so grateful to have my family on here with my jam in the background. But like, but also having good sister friends like Lisalyn and I exchanging music with each other, right? Making sure that on this road trip, she's got like this long, long playlist that I have, a couple of them that I'm sharing, right? Aleese, you and I exchanging every so often, Aleese, you drop me something in my text message, in my text, and I'm just like, how did you know that right now I needed that? How did you know that? But you do that. And Chrystal, I don't, I'm meeting you now, but like when you started off this conversation talking about spirit, right? Like the reminder that back to your point, Aleese, is that I think that, one of the lessons for me has been that I continue to think I do this myself. I continue to think I got here myself. I have to be reminded I didn't. I have to be reminded that my bills get paid and that's not something I did, right? Like I have to keep remembering that, God is my employer, right? As a small business owner. And so like for me, um, the working too hard is what doesn't serve me. It actually serves me when I'm putting like my faith and my energy in a direction that like on this, on this holiday, this holiday weekend that we're in, and the various faiths that can be that may be listening to this call, or various forms of spirituality that might not be connected to any kind of like sort of organized process. But when we know in our gut, like spirit holds us, I think that that is what we have to keep leaning back into and keep pouring into that and keep pulling and keep receiving from that. And hopefully, if we're doing more of that, at least we're not working, we're not working at our own detriment.
Yes. 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 Um, but the truth is, so just like maybe 2 months ago, I did a series of listening sessions with Black EDs across the country. I think I listened to probably about 60 different EDs, Black EDs, Black women, who as a norm, before all this stuff that's happening right now, as a norm, we're trying to figure out, so when I can't make payroll, I don't pay myself to make sure the staff gets paid.
Or working a part-time job outside of the full-time job as an ED. Yeah.
Right. Who women talking about they work 7 days a week. And so I hear you. You and I, we're on the same page. My question is, what can we do? And not necessarily just us four people right here, but I mean, what can we do to begin to shift the thinking, the belief system of Black women in social justice, that they have to fill the gap and that
Right.
it's right for them to make any sacrifice necessary to fill that gap? How do we change that belief system and that narrative? This generations old.
Mm-hmm.
It is generations old, yeah.
Absolutely.
and continuously being passed on. It's this, we have our own generational, messages that we pass on. And, just thinking about, I was talking to a person I coached yesterday and was just like saying to them, as people are coming into the program or coming into your work, you're carrying the generational wealth. You want to pass that on to people. And this is like within the context of a workplace. You need to pass that on to the people that are coming in. Don't make people start from scratch or at a deficit. Have people coming in with this information you've learned. So I think probably a part of what we have to talk about today is if there's any progress we've made or ways that we have shifted our own narrative, so I think learning from each other is one way, and passing on what we've learned in terms of how, because like one of the things I'm going to start to do and start to approach more is, directly seeing what Black women I can support and that are running programs, right? How can you get supported in this process, making sure people have resources or anything I know, right? So I think it's like reaching out directly to folks, handing them things that we know, making sure that they're talking to each other like you did. You went around, you talked with them, but also creating spaces for people to be able to have these conversations and to problem solve and to resource share so that they're not alone in it. Because one of the things as an ED that I was, it was the isolation that was really hard for me. It was just the isolation um, and the psychological feeling, like just the experience that that somehow I on my own again had to lift it up or move forward, push things. um and right, the first reaction is to work more, right? And I think that we have to find ways to help people share resources, share information, and I think we are actually not going to have any choice. We're going to have to start thinking about how we do this work on a shoestring and collaboratively, because the pretty, I think I think that a movement of domestic violence and sexual assault, but I also think social justice movements who have been receiving federal, government money in some way, shape, or form. I mean, it's all imperiled, right? Like at some point, we have to begin thinking about how do we reach and support each other without these systems, but also how to do it in a way that is much more community based, much more communal in nature, and much more collaborative in nature, and much more partner based, as opposed to the individual silos that actually don't match up with our value systems anyway, but just where we have landed. I think we work real hard when we're in systems that don't come natural to us, right? Like when these are not systems that match our way, we work real hard to try to match up to it, to level up, I constantly, I'm still training up. I don't know a time where I haven't been training up, but um but that's because I'm walking and moving through systems that just don't come naturally to me. I have to work hard at that, and I do have to work 3 and 4 times harder, and then especially when the markers change and when the rules change and when the process changes. So we're going to have to start trying to create processes, and going and learning from and going back to folks who have done this before, going back to our ancestors, going back to, folks who came up through, the antebellum period, and, all the other periods, the Reconstruction period, all these ways that they've come through, Jim Crow, how they came through when they didn't have, all these things. And they still found time for more family, more community, and they've still found ways to be collaborative and to be community based. I think we have to find those ways. And I still don't have a real easy answer, Aleese, but I think um, we have to start acknowledging that we're in a system that that is not shaped for us, was never made for us, and not even the DEI, right? Like not even the DEI matched what we needed. When you have an affirmative action bill, when you have this affirmative action, but it's an executive order, right? When we already know that we had to beg and fight to make sure that they were going to like take lynching off the records, right? Like these systems are not made for us. So we have to acknowledge that and then not beat up on ourselves for feeling like we have to work so hard, try to work through a system that's not for us in the first place. And then start to find ways to pull ourselves out of that and start to find other ways of lifting up. I don't know what all those look like, but I think we're going to actually have no choice here soon. So I think that's where we're going to be.
Well, so yes and yes and yes. I think that it's going to take a lot of different venues, I don't know what, actions to change our minds, because that's really what needs to change our minds. We need to change our minds. We need to change what we think and what we believe about ourselves, starting there. And therefore, then we can change how we think and believe, how we engage in relationship with other people, whether that's through service or whatever.
And this really is, I would argue, one person at a time kind of work. It was Tonya describing, right, sharing lists of music and the ways that you share with her, Aleese. I got a little steam sauna tent around the holidays. So I find myself when I reach out to sisters talking about how I have at least taken some time periodically to do that and asking what they're doing, right? What is your self-care ritual? I, had a call last week with a sister friend who I know stays running. And I said, my sister love, request to you is that if you have, our call was 3:30. I said, if you have not eaten lunch before you get on our call, please stop and get yourself something, right? So that you are taking care of you and you have some fuel to deal with the rest of the day before you get on the phone with me, because I can wait.
Lisalyn, I
Right.
had to laugh because I don't think you
But
know
she was
that
talking
that's
about
me
you.
half the time. That's me half the time. I'm just laughing at myself. I'm like, maybe you need to start asking me that question when we talk. Did you eat today, sis? Because that's me most of the time. It's just yeah. I am
There you
trying to
go.
teach myself to be more wired, to be more in my tactic, to be more in my body, to be more embodied, in what I'm doing, so that and being more in touch. I mean, some of that is just also how my actual brain works, and some reasons why that happens. But also I think what you said to her was so important, because like it's those basic things, because there's no need, because it ends up being that we're punishing ourselves. Like that's what it ends up being. It's like self-punishment. Um, and when we don't have to do that, that's actually, and I try to remember that, because I try to remember that when I am doing these things and not stopping to fuel myself, that it ends up being neglect of myself, and it ends up being um, you know, it is self-harm. And there's
Yep.
already enough harm. Uh,
Right.
and having a front seat to like my own victimization of myself is probably not the best way to manage, and so I've been trying to remember that in that way, that I myself have to um, center my own, not just my own wellness and health, but also like my own humanity. Like I have to do that. And one other thing is that like a couple of weeks ago, I reached out by text to a series of women that I just hadn't been in touch with for like 3, 4 years, whatever, and just asked them how they're doing in this time and shared a little bit about how I just had struggled, had a pretty serious struggle in the beginning of the year, and how now I'm on the upswing. I'm feeling much better. And asked them and told them a couple of things I'm doing for myself, and then asked them, what are you doing? And how are you feeling? And when I tell you, sisters were just like they were just like, Tonya, I'm so blessed that you reached out to me. I'm so glad you did this. I'm so glad you asked me this. Let me tell you what's going on. And it was just a good, it was a good exchange. And I just had this feeling to just do it. And I think that it is about like being led to like support each other through some of these things and reaching out and saying, have you eaten today?
And a lot of times we hear about mental health now, and people are a lot more open to talking about it and sharing their thoughts. One thing could be that we make it cool to be like, have you taken care of yourselves? Like stop filling the gap, right? Or something. Yeah. So just trying to think like, for every generation, what would be a catchy way of just reminding people like, you don't have to fill the gap. It's not like you're enough. Maybe you're enough is it? Maybe that's it. I'm enough, you're enough, or stop filling the gap. But something kind of hashtag could be helpful to remind folks like it's okay. Take your time.
Absolutely.
I get stuck sometimes. My brain gets stuck sometimes when I think about like some of the things you guys are identifying, like Tonya, you talked about, working less and sharing resources and working on a shoestring and all of those things. And I think all those things are important for about, changing how we do the work. And I'm not saying I'm right. I try to never say I'm right anymore because I'm usually wrong.
When did that start?
And
I'm sorry.
After I left WOCN.
Oh, I see. I understand.
I think that, it's about changing how we do the work. I think that's part of it. But I think also is about why we do the work, because I think how we do the work comes from why we do the work. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the real internal work that needs to happen. I think we'll start changing how we do the work if we can reconcile with why we do the work. Because we do it the way we do it because of something that we think and believe about ourselves and others. And that's the root. I want to get to both things. I want to get to the root of it. And I also want to get to, I also want to be able to, this podcast is for people to learn strategies and resources of how they can change the way they work through. So I want them to get tools too about changing how they do the work. But I also want this to be a place where they wrestle with why they do the work.
Why do you do the work, Aleese?
I do the work for two reasons. One, I fell in love with Black people. My father was blackety black, black, black. In elementary school, he was bringing me posters of Malcolm and Martin, putting them up on my wall, and he would come and read me articles from the SNCC magazine. I was in like the 3rd and 4th grade in elementary school. He was keeping me abreast of what was happening in the civil rights movement, even though I was just a little kid. And his passion around it, it was the only place I saw my father's passion. After his mother died, he lost everything, hope for everything, except his love for Black. I don't know if it was Black people or just justice for Black people. I can't say which one. It could be both. I don't know. But anyway, so that was just ingrained in me. I just grew up loving Black people, who they are, what they do, their struggle, blah, 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 blah. I fell in love with that. And so all I wanted to be, and then we were poor. And the Methodist church at the corner, they provided all these services, all these community services. The community, through the church platform, provided all these services for the community. And so all I wanted to do when I grew up was be some kind of community organizer, through the church that would help Black communities work through their struggles and heal and be whole and grow and all that. That's since I was at elementary school. That's what I wanted to do. So that's the first of all main reason I do that. I think also in the bigger scheme of things, I think it is part of my purpose. I think it's part of my supernatural DNA, part of my divine DNA for being here. I think I'm here at this time. I used to, when I was younger, I used to say I was cheated because I should have been an adult during the civil rights era. I should have been a part of that. And for a long time, I felt cheated because I wasn't part of that. And thinking that I would never have to, thinking that the struggle and the fight was over, I guess. Too young to know better at the time. And so I think I'm here for such a time as this.
Come on, Esther.
Yeah. But, yes, but to your point, to your unspoken point, the way that I did the work the way that I did it because of my experience as a child of child abuse, of child neglect, of sexual assault, of all those things that dehumanized me, taught me to devalue myself, not see any worth except for what my brain might think and conjure up and do. That was my only worth. My only value was that I was smart. That's what they told me. And so I thought the only thing I had to offer was get smarter and smarter and then do more and do more. And so, yes. And it took many years for me to realize that all of that was a lie. Yeah. Many years and people to learn that was a lie. And then to see myself and to fall in love with myself. And it wasn't until that place and time that I realized, oh, I want to be about this differently. I still want to work in social justice. I still want to do that because that's what I'm here for. But I realize now I don't have to kill myself to do it. I don't have to have 3 more strokes. The strokes are done. There'll be no more strokes here. I don't have to kill myself to do it. My sacrifice is not required.
Wow.
And I think that, I know I'm not alone. It's so many of us as Black women are still trying to prove our value and our worth through our professions, through our work, through our volunteerism, through our connectedness at the church. We're still trying to say somehow that by our very life, our being, our presence as a human being, we're worthy and valuable. We're still trying to do that, still trying to prove that to ourselves just as much to anyone else.
Preach, sis.
And so when I say that I want to get at the why, because I think that's where the healing and the transformation happens.
Yes.
And even if we don't do the work better, if we get to a place where we're in love with ourselves and we value and respect and care for ourselves while we do the work hard as hell, I'm down for that. But my God, I don't want us to be cheated out of our entire lives.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. You know, in some ways, I can't even think of her name now. Oh my God, it's on a recording. Oh my God. Um, mm, and I'm trying to look for the picture because I have a picture right here now. Um, don't y'all laugh at me. I'm gonna have to have this edited out of the recording.
Everybody's laughing at you, laughing with you, because that's
In
me all day.
in a minute, you may not be though. So the sister that let all the slaves out.
Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman. Couldn't think of her name. Sorry, Harriet.
It's all right.
So in some ways, I'm a Harriet Tubman in the sense that when I found out what life was like to be in love with, oh my God, once I started falling in love with myself, I want everybody now to fall in love. I want every Black woman to know what it is to be in love with herself. I want every Black woman to know that freedom. I want every Black woman to know who she is and to love herself with all her stuff. I want that for every Black woman. I don't want any woman to close her eyes and not have ever known how magnificent and majestic she is. So now you got me preaching. I almost stopped.
It was good.
Yeah, and so that's to answer. That's why I do. That's why I do the work, and I think a lot of us do the work for the same reasons that I started doing this work, out of our own issues, our own sense of self-worth.
I started doing the work before I knew that that's why I was doing it, right? Like I didn't know I was doing it to save myself, that I would end up being my own savior later, or that I would create an organization that would help save me, right? Like I didn't realize that that would be what this work was. I didn't really start calling myself like a child sexual assault survivor until I was all the way in, years in. Didn't realize that. I have gone back and figured those things out. I just knew that when I sat in my course of the first day of women's studies and had a white professor that I'm still connected with, and me and another sister, who, I should not say her name because I'm not sure if she wants her stuff out there like that, but another sister who was sitting there with me in the class, we were, she came and she just, she came into the classroom and she said, well, I need you all to sit, even though I know this is theater style, I need you all to sit in a circle. Because I don't know if I should say this on your podcast, but she basically said that she is not going to, um, uh, that she's not going to ejaculate her thoughts on us. She wanted us to know that she was not going to stand over us in that way. She wanted us to sit around in a circle. And then she told us that she wants us to start calling ourselves women because we were women. It was the second thing she said. And then she said, you all as women are to be in solidarity with each other and start to see each other that way. And then she said, Black women, look to your right and look to your left because white women are going to participate in your oppression. And you need to be prepared in order to address that, and to sustain yourself within that and to stand on your own foundation. And I mean, that's day one of women's studies. I have not been the same ever since. But all that really did was line up with what I already had in front of me. I already had a mom who was the person that everybody came to when they needed something, and when people needed to understand, about, any of the things that were happening to them in their lives as Black girls, and early pregnancies, and all of the other things that were happening. My mom was the person. So that was amazing for me. So I had that already undergirded. I already had both of my grandmothers who were, very powerful women in both of the ways that they did their work, very different ways that they worked, but their foundation, the foundation of them was very powerful for me. And so I knew I was already standing like on these strong shoulders. And then just as I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do, and I'm not figure it out, but as I'm preparing myself to be I was going to be a career college person. I mean, career professor or whatever, a career, I forgot what they call that. See, here we go with forgetting, but I thought I was going to be like academic completely. And I'm back in school to get my second and third, master's degrees. And then I find out I'm about to have this little child. And the whole thing shifted for me. Because after I had my kid and I had the blessing of being able to stay home with my kid for months, some things became clear, that I needed to make sure that I could sustain both of us, and that I wanted to do it in a work that was going to be meaningful, because I already knew that social justice bug was already in me, from being in college and from the work and the experiences there and from my family being who they are. But then having this little person who is just already smarter than me before they even hit 2 or 3 or 4, and watching them grow and wanting to create a world that's better for them and wanting to support them too. It's like that's part of the reason why I keep doing the work. But also I keep doing the work because there's work to be done. And Aleese, you were one of the first people, though, who said to me that how important it was, though, for me to not think that all the work that has to be done by me. Not only does it have to all be done by me, does it not have to be done by me, and that I should let other people help do that work, and that we needed to create a table where there's more collective work, but that it was that it kind of goes against the work I'm trying to do that to myself. And even though it's been a long, long pathway, I mean, I think that is at least that's well over a decade that you said that to me. It's still a thing. It's still a thing that I'm trying to work towards. It's, I'm still trying to not keep myself going on automatic, but to be intentional every day about where my efforts are going and making sure that I'm not doing what you were talking about, which is, because something is going on, that means I have to work 20 times harder. So that is a daily thing I have to work at. So, but I could not imagine doing any other work than what I'm doing. And, at the end of the day, I have a master's in Black studies and a master's in women's studies. Who else am I going to try to support but Black women? It's just, I was set up to do this. This is my work. So I just want to keep doing it. But I want to do it in a way, though, that is not harmful to me or to them. And when I'm not taking care of me, I'm not taking care of them. So this again is a process I've been learning.
I very much vibe with a lot of what you were saying, Tonya, but particularly the part about making the world better. I mean, again, I'm nearly 60. I keep saying it, I'm owning it. In theory, this is the point in my life when I should be thinking about passing the baton, right? But certainly when January came, I was just like, how we like to say, sis, this ain't it, right? This is not the world I was led to believe I should be creating or, building or handing off to the next generation or my kids' generation or just a variety of other things like that. I think that one of the reasons I certainly am still in the work, I did not additionally come to this work as, at minimum, as a quintessential survivor. I came to the work because I was at the U.S. Justice Department and it was in my portfolio, but that was 30 some odd years ago. So one can at least ask a reasonable question about why I stay. A very wise woman once said, just sort of observed how many folks are in this work who either have not found their way to their own healing or in the process of that. And certainly at this historical moment, I cannot imagine anything more re-traumatizing than watching, somebody who everyone knows to be a predator get reelected and invite all his predator friends into the clubhouse to literally undo the work, to unbuild the house, all the things. So, I also have the great benefit of, still having my 95-year-old mom, right? Who is as wise a soul as I ever expect to encounter, and who most days is more compos mentis than me, right? So for both generations, for both the elders who have seen a lot and have a lot of wisdom to share still, but for our kids who are coming up, who have their own wisdom and their own ways of doing things, and I do not expect my son's generation to look like this or act like this or tolerate this, but we have to leave them something. We have to fight for something to leave them. But to your point, Aleese, I think we also have to fight so that we're just not leaving them memories of us, but we are here, with them to do the work, but also to pass on the wisdom. Not to pass on, to pass on the wisdom. I look forward to being in a rocking chair somewhere, wagging my finger and telling my son all the thoughts about the things I think he should be doing in his generation's version of the struggle. But, we are a long way from that. But so trying to make space for folks to, as Aleese was describing it, fall in love with themselves, which to me that's closer to the end process of finding one's way to healing and working through that. That too, I think, is part of the work. And that's very much what I was pointing to when I said a lot of this work is internal, right? Equity is an external thing, but you can't be telling people and guiding people and molding people and talking about inclusion and all the things if you are not building that or storing that up for yourself or making sure that you are a recipient of all those things.
Chrystal, you got the closing statement.
Bring it on home, as James Brown used to say.
I mean, I just would echo all the things. I'm just soaking it up, actually. So, I think one thing, Aleese, is that we had a conversation for maybe 2 hours at a cafe in Oakland. And in that conversation, in some ways, I mean, I felt like you gave me permission to not have to fill the gap. And you said, we already are. Before everything, you already are. And that has been so empowering and so encouraging. And I think there's no easy answer, like you said. There's no one fix. There's not one solution. It's dynamic. But women like you and like on this podcast who share their stories and give people permission to be who they are is a good start.
Yes. That is how I learned to love myself. I watched another woman, my deceased wife, who loved herself like crazy. I never knew anybody could love themselves so much. And so, yes, absolutely. We have to embody the message that we carry. We have to be an example. I tell my daughter all the time, never mind what I told you when you were growing up. Watch me now.
Mhm.
Watch me
Like
now.
me now, huh?
Yeah, watch me now. I'm finally living the life that I want to demonstrate before you.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so I want to say thank you, my sisters. All of you have spoken into my life in so many different ways. And I'm grateful for the way in which you have spoken into so many other Black women's lives. You have no idea. You have no idea. Okay, I'm gonna take 2 more minutes. Wait. So there's this this movie called the Old Gods. No, the Old Guard. That's the name of it, the Old Guard. Um, with the pretty white woman, I can't think of her name. She's the exception to the rule for me. Um, so anyway, the movie is about these people who are almost eternal. They,
Scarlett Johansson.
yeah, no,
No, Charlize Theron.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's an exception, an exception too, though, Chrystal.
I'm seeing a pattern here.
Okay. Yes. So they are almost eternal. They can be killed, but they come back. They regenerate. They come right back. So anyway, they've been around for centuries. Centuries they've been around, and they've always fought for the oppressed group on the planet. They always help some group set themselves free. And so that's their thing. What's her name? Cherie? Charlize. She's the head one. She's the oldest one. She's tired. She's gotten tired. She's like, they're in the world right now. And then she's like, there's no more good and bad. Everybody's evil. There's no one to protect or serve. They all want to be greedy and blah, 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 blah. So she's like, I'm tired. I'm tired of dying and coming back. I'm tired of humanity is not getting any better, blah, blah. She wants to be out. And so she gets severely wounded where it looks like she's not going to rejuvenate this last time. And so her crew gather around her to try to convince her that, to fight to live. And so this Black professor, has been tracking them historically. And so he's got this board up on the wall, and he's connected the dots between every person whose life that they saved, how either they or their children or their children's children made some significant impact on the world to make the world a better place. Mm. And so, you follow her string of all the lives she's saved and the impact she's made on humanity. And it is just overwhelming. And this gives her the courage to rejuvenate one more time and to keep up the good fight. And I'm saying that to say all that was my favorite movie to talk about. But all that to say, that's you all. You all will never know how many people whose lives you've changed, transformed, I want to say saved. And the impact that they then have had on other people's lives. People they have mentored, shared, supported, their children, their grandchildren. You'll never know the goodness that you've brought to this world. And I just want to say thank you. Though thank you is not enough. That's not the right word. I don't have any other words. But I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I've known you, that I've walked with you, and you've been a part of my life. And I'm grateful for what you've done to make this world a better, as jacked up as it is, it's a better place because you all have been here.
Likewise, Aleese, likewise, including this platform that you have created for us, especially for us.
Thank you, my sister, for your leadership and for this platform and your wisdom and your wingspan,
Hey,
encompassing all that you do beneath it.
This is not goodbye, though, Aleese. It kind of sounded like you were saying goodbye. This is not goodbye. We talk tomorrow.
hey, right?
Right.
Like,
You're amazing,
Hopefully
and
we'll
you're gonna
always
stay
be on the
amazing.
text or the
Okay.
phone some kind of way. Yes.
Okay.
And we have a couple shows we got to catch up on. So I'm looking forward to that. That's for sure.
we got whole things to lift up and move forward, Aleese. So no.
Right.
Yes. Yes. I'm sure there'll be more of these. I'm sure I'm going to be circling back around to all of you for one-on-one interviews. So don't be surprised. Don't when you get the invite, don't say, wasn't I on that show before? Let you know now. You'll be getting
Right. There'll be a part 2.
And it has been a pleasure, my dear sister Lisalyn Jacobs, DLJ, that I hang out with quite a bit these days. Been crossing paths for a couple of decades now. It's a blessing. And Chrystal, it has been a pleasure as well to meet and connect with you. And certainly I hope this is not over, like this is not the end as well. And to that person that's sitting behind that screen right there, my jam, so grateful to be on here with you, my dear.
who makes it all happen.
There you go.
I get to
Igual.
show up now.
Igual. Pay lots of
yes.
pay lots of attention to that person behind the curtain. Jam,
That's
jam.
there, and that's
Jam,
it.
jam, ruler of all day survey. But deeply grateful for this time spent with you, Chrystal, as well with you, Sister Tonya. We of the many struggles and adventures.
Yes, Thelma Louise out here sometimes.
Woo. There, we got the right initials. I guess that makes me Louise. I'm not driving off any cliffs, though. Let's just be
Hey,
clear.
that's right. There'll be no driving off of cliffs.
I never thought about that, Aleese. I mean, Lisalyn, wow, we really do have those 2 initials. There we go.
So thank you all of you who participated, who took out time today to be on this call. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, my sisters, our guest speakers. If you want to be on the podcast, if you want to share your story, your wisdom, your strategies for change, please email me at blackwomentalkingback@gmail.com. We're lining up panelists all the time. We're going to do some panelists, and we're going to do a lot of individual interviews. So there are a lot of sisters that have written books this last couple of years. I want to interview sisters who are writing their stories, who are telling their stories in book form, those who are doing new research and policy work, just our gamut, the full gamut. So if you're interested in being on the podcast, please email me and let me know. Once again, I love you all. I love you, every single one of you. I love you. Until the next time, don't forget to follow us.